Good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to all of you to this session. Is audible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. As part of the STEM learning workshop, Innovation Hub of Regional Science Center and Planetarium is organizing 5 days program. This is the third day program of this event. Today, we are going to discuss the science of cooking. Most of the people are very much interested in cooking. Now, interest in cooking, baking, and food has risen tremendously over the past few years. Means during the lockdown period, all most of the people have experimented various cooking and find out how to make new dishes. So here I am not making a dish and all. I'm just talking about the science of cooking. So now I'm going to share my screen. Before that, now you see that kitchen. Most of the people are very much familiar with the kitchen. In kitchen, you know that every day so many innovations are taking place in kitchen. And every day your family members prepare so many dishes in kitchen. So different, you know that this is number one innovation center of in your home. There is a kitchen, your kitchen. You can notice that using several materials, you can prepare so many dishes, so many items in a. Every day you can change. If you change the quantity and just call it this one, the amount of quantity and all this, you can make a different type of dishes. In that way, you can make different things and different items. Sometimes it will be very taste. Sometimes it may not be that much taste. So you can experiment a lot of things in kitchen. So I am now today I'm just dealing with the science behind cooking. Now I'm going to share my screen. Just about introduction. The process of cooking, baking, and preparing food is essentially an applied science. Most of the people think that only physics, chemistry, they're only science, because cooking is also a science, applied science. So what are the various procedures behind cooking? You can notice that various procedures, what are the reactions taking place. All these are is an applied science. Anthropologists and historians venture that cooking originated when a pen-holding pig or other livestock caught fire, or a piece of the day's catch mammoth fell into a fire pit. The smell of roasted meat must have enticed early people to try it. The curious consumers found culinary and nutritional benefits to this new discovery. The molecular changes that occurred during cooking made the meat more digestible and protein and carbohydrates more readily available as nutrients. Contaminating microbes were eliminated during cooking, which made the consumers more healthy and able to survive. When you eat a raw meat and all, so there are no many microbes and all, it will affect your health problem. But if you prepare it, cook it well, so you can, all these microbes will be eliminated and your food was tastier due to the heat-induced chemical reaction between the oxygen in the air and the fat, proteins, and sugar in the meat. Harnessing the knowledge of what is happening to our food at the molecular level is something that good scientists and chefs use to create new appetizing food and cooking techniques. Now you know that most of the people know so many cooking courses are available, different degrees are available. Some people select their career in hotel management course. There they can teach, they can learn so many how to make and different types of dishes and new items. All these things will be taught in this course. We all are all born curious. Science and cooking are natural partners where curiosity and experimentation can lead to exciting and tasty new inventions. Scientific discovery is driven by hypothesis. So when you are preparing a food and all this, sometimes you may not be, when you are taking a new item and you want to make a new item. So that time you will hypothesize that after preparing this is the final product. But you may not be sure that whether it will be successful or not. But if on your experimentation, ultimately it will come true. An observation of an event creates a question or a statement that explains the observational phenomenon, the hypothesis. The hypothesis can be tested by a series of experiments and controls that supports or falsify the hypothesis, starting the cycle over again. Suppose a scientist might observe that the growth of rate of cancer cells in a petri dish slows when the cells are exposed to a sea sponge. Then the scientist may then hypothesize that a molecule found in the sponge binds to a protein in cancer cells. After adding the compound to a tumor, its growth slowed and the cells die. Looking at how all of the individual molecules found in the sea sponge affect the growth of the cancer cells and can test the hypothesis. These experiments can lead to a more advanced hypothesis testing and eventually finding a new compound that can be used to fight cancer. Cooking can also be a hypothesis-driven process that utilizes biology, chemistry, and physics. As you cook, you use biology, chemistry, and physics to create hypotheses in the kitchen. If you are not aware of the material, each time you try a recipe, you make observations. So various permutation and combination, you will get a final result. You may ask yourself question about what you added to the concentration or how the food was baked or cooked. This creates a hypothesis or statement or prediction that you can test through experimentation. Then your next attempt at the dish also you can try again and again. A non-scientific idea is often approached as something to prove. This is different from hypothesis testing. A hypothesis falsified rather than proven by testing. Cooking does just this. It will falsify your test rather than prove it. Testing, tasting, smelling, and visualizing your result tell you if your hypothesis were supported or falsified. If wrong, you may create a new hypothesis that might be generated by the time you have washed the dishes from your first experiment. Learning more of the basic science behind food and cooking will help you appreciate the world around you and become a better scientist and a better cook, baker, and a consumer. So most of the people, they may not have that talent or idea what to prepare, but on experimentation and try and error, you can ultimately make a new dish and develop a new item. So in that way, you can initially you can hypothesis, and from that hypothesis, ultimately you will come to a conclusion. You will get a result. Bread baking provides a great example of the importance of having scientific understanding of cooking and baking. Most of the people are very much aware of bread. When you are next time when you are eating bread, then you just take a close look at bread. Most of the people never, while eating, you just before eating you just take a bread and just observe the structure and all bread. Then you take a close look at bread. Notice that it is made of large and small caves surrounded by a solid wall. The key to bread is making a way to trap expanding gases in the dough. Adding water to flour and sugar allows for the hydration and mixing of proteins and carbohydrates. Kneading the dough stretches a protein called gluten, which allows for an interconnected network of protein ready to trap gas that is generated by the yeast. Some people might have seen that in bakery and all, how they manufacture process behind the bread. During the proofing step of making bread, the yeast converts sugar into energy-filled molecule, ethanol, carbon dioxide gas, and other flavorable byproducts. The heat applied during baking allows the water to escape as steam, which expands the bread, links the gluten protein molecule further, and traps carbon dioxide gas. While this is happening, the heat catalyzes chemical reactions between proteins and sugars, creating a beautiful brown color, a dense texture, and over 500 new aromatic compounds that waft your nose. Clearly, there's a lot of science that goes into making a loaf of bread. You never thought of what are the process behind making a bread, because in that, when making a single bread, so much process is taking place, so much chemical reactions are occurring in that process. So similarly, in each and everything, this type of actions are taking place. Preparing food and drink is mostly a process of changing the chemical and physical nature of the food. When you are preparing a food, you are changing their physical and chemical nature of that material, what you are using for preparing the food. Molecules react to form new compounds. Heat changes the nature of how food molecules function and interact with each other. And physical change brings about our new textures and flavors, what we eat. To gain a better appreciation for these chemical and physical processes, a fundamental understanding of building blocks of food and cooking must be understood. One of the most important building block of food is water. Our bodies, food and environment are dependent on the unique chemistry and biology of water molecule. Water molecule is very much important in the process of cooking. You know that most of the without water you cannot cook a material. Large biological molecules such as proteins, carbohydrates, fats comprise the basic building blocks of our food. Smaller molecules including vitamins, salts, and organic molecules add important components to cooking and the taste of food. Finally, the basics of plant and animal and cellular organization are key to understand the nature of food or cooking process. However, before we get into some of the scientific fundamentals, we should know what are the science behind this cooking. Many chefs and bakers embrace the collaboration of science and food, because only so many scientists are interested in cooking. Then they know some historically one means whereby science has been utilized in the kitchen is in the area of food technology, a discipline in which biology, physical science, and engineering are used to study the nature of food, the cause of their deterioration, and the principle underlying the food processing. This area of food science is very important, ensuring the safety and quality of food preparation, processing of raw food into a packaged materials, and formation of a stable and edible food. College and undergraduates can major in food science or attend graduate studies in the area, working for a food production company, where they might look at the formulation and packaging of cereals, rice, or canned vegetables. Recently, a new marriage of science and food coined molecular gastronomy has gone into influence of popular culture that extends beyond the historical definition of food science. A physicist at Oxford, Dr. Nicholas Curtis' interest in food led him to meld his passion for understanding the nature of matter and cooking. In 1984, Harold Magee, an astronomist with a doctorate in literature from Yale University, wrote the first edition of the influential and comprehensive book on food and cooking, The Science and Lore of the Kitchen. This fascinating book is the basis for much of the molecular gastronomy movement and describes the scientific and historical details behind most common, or we can say some uncommon, culinary techniques. Together with cooking instructor Elizabeth Cardry, Thomas Magee and Curtis held a scientific workshop to bring together a physical sciences with cooking in 1992 in Neris, Italy. While there was more scientists than chefs attending with 5:1 ratio, the impact of the meeting was significant. It was the erects that beginning of what was then called molecular and physical gastronomy became the catalyst of an unseen and growth science in cooking. Now let us see the real shape of food on the molecular basis. What are the fundamental units of all food and cooking process? They are atoms and molecules. You know that all living system, that is animals, microbes, and smaller life forms, are made of atoms and molecules. How these atoms and molecules are organized, interact, and react, providing the building blocks of chemistry of life. It makes sense that us to understand cooking and baking at the molecular level, you must first appreciate how atoms and compounds put together and function. To know the fundamentals of cooking, we should start from the molecular structure of an atom. You must first appreciate. Let us start with the basic and ask what is the difference between atom and a molecule. Most of the people are very familiar with this. What is an atom? What is a molecule? An atom is the smallest basic building block of all matter, while molecules are made of when two or more atoms connected to one another. An atom consists of three main components, also known as subatomic particles. These subatomic particles are proton, neutrons, and electrons. Here, protons and neutrons are found in the center or nucleus of the atom, while electrons orbit around the core of the atom. Protons are positively charged particles with an atomic mass of 1 atomic mass unit, and the neutrons essentially also have atomic mass of 1 but do not have any electrical charge. Electrons have almost no mass but an electrical charge of negative charge. The elements of periodic table are arranged and defined by the number of protons present within an atom of a given element. The number of protons defines an atom, not the electrons or neutrons. As stated, the number of protons in an atom defines that atom. Any atom with 6 protons is a carbon. Any atom with 7 protons is nitrogen. Thus, if a carbon gains a proton, it became nitrogen atom. However, if a carbon atom gains or loses an electron, it still is a carbon, but now has charge associated with it. The total number of protons and electrons define the charge of an atom. An atom of any element with an equal number of protons and electrons will have net neutral charge. Atoms that gains an electron will have a negative charge, and those that have lost an electron will have a positive charge. Most of the atoms and elements on the periodic table can gain or lose 1 or more electrons and the number of neutrons within a given type of atom can also vary. You might have heard about isotope. Isotopes are atoms that have same number of protons, but they differ in number of neutrons. Carbon 12 and carbon 13 are both have 6 protons, but carbon 12 and 6 neutrons for total atomic mass 12, while carbon 13 has 7 neutrons. And when including the mass of protons, atomic mass of 613. Now we'll see what about a compound or a molecule. How does a molecule differ from an atom or a compound? A molecule is a substance of 2 or more atoms connected by sharing electrons. That is covalent bonds. A compound is a chemical substance made of different atoms. Compounds can be made of atoms held together by ionic or covalent bonds, where molecules are made only by covalently bond atoms. Thus, all molecules and compounds, but not all compounds are molecules. But molecules are often categorized further into organic, that is organic and inorganic molecules. Organic means most of the molecules containing mostly carbon atom. Most of the compounds found in living things contain carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen or hydrogen atom. A group of other elements including sulfur, magnesium and iron make less than 1% of atom in most of the living systems. Traces elements such as copper, zinc, chromium and even arsenic, although necessary for biological function, only make up a minute portion of an organism, that is less than 0.01%. Due to their complexity and impact on their behavior in cooking, now we'll discuss about bonds that connect atoms together. Salts are a very important aspect of food, because you know that in all your food items what you are taking today, salt is an essential part of it. You know what is a salt and what is the chemical formula? Ionic and there are different types of bonds. There are 2 types of bonds that connects 2 atoms to yield a molecule compound. That is ionic and covalent bonds. Ionic bonds formed between atoms have opposite charges due to the loss or gain of electrons. Actually, why I am talking all these things, because when we are preparing a food and all this actually that's changes occurring at the molecular level. That is why we are telling about the various what are the bonds between the atoms. Atoms that have become charged have their own name, ions. Ionic bonds form when ion with a positive charge, that is a cation, is bonded with an ion with a negative charge, an anion. The resulting molecule is called an ionic compound or a salt. This terminology is approached because the salt that you sprinkle on any of food, that is sodium chloride, is an ionic compound consisting of positively charged sodium atom. Sodium chloride, you know that the formula is NaCl, that is an ionic compound, and negatively charged chlorine atom, that is chloride ion. The compounds are divided into molecules that have charge or those without a charge. When you are taking sodium, salt and all, you may not be, you never think about that is a sodium, that is what is a compound, what is a bond between the sodium chlorine. Just when you are preparing in your kitchen, you just add that salt into that whatever your dish you are making. Ionic compounds are molecules that have somehow lost or gained electrons, resulting in a compound with 2 parts. One atom or group with positive charge and bonded another atom or group with a negative charge. One of the atoms in an ionic compound will have at least one metal element, that is either sodium, potassium, calcium, aluminum, etc. Metal atoms are more readily give or accept electron and transforming the atoms into a charged ionic atom. These metal atoms have the tendency to accept or give electrons. The simplest ionic compounds are formed from monoatomic ions, where 2 ions of opposite charge act as the functional units. A good example is our table salt. In addition to single atom ions, a group of covalently ions are made of several atoms bonded as a group, which is charged. Potassium, commonly called saltpeter, and used in curing meat, is a complex polyatomic ion with a chemical formula KNO3, where potassium ion K plus provide the positive charge and the nitrate ion NO3 negative charge. Nitrates compounds have historically used to preserve meat and fish. The nitrate dries the meat by drawing water out of the muscle tissue, leaving an inhospitable environment to the bacteria to grow. As a solid and ionic atoms are tightly held together by opposite charges in large networks called lattice. In water, however, the attractive forces between cation and anion compounds of the ionic compound is shielded by water and separated from another. You can observe this phenomenon when you watch the teaspoon of salt dissolves in a glass of water. What is happening at the molecular level? Water is a polar covalent molecule with a positive and negative partial charge. The hydrogen have a partial positive charge while the oxygen has a partial negative charge. You know that water is H2O molecule. Water molecule align with the charge while the oxygen has a partial negative charge. Water molecules align with the charge of the ion, forming a solvating shell of water. This coating of water acts to shield the attraction between ions, which can then separate from one another to dissolving in the water. The structure of molecule defines how the function in a cell and how a food may taste or react when cooking or baking. Special groups of molecule called functional groups are define the behavior of molecules. Functional groups are arrangements of atoms that have specific chemical and biochemical behavior. These groups of atoms are useful to predict and understand properties of organic molecules and the molecules' importance in food and cooking. You know that some about the individual molecular components of food and molecules. But that doesn't provide a full picture of what happens when a protein clumps when eggs are cooked. When fat globules curdle together when I'm making a cheese, or when flour is added to broth to make a thicky gravy. In all this process and many others, it is interaction of different molecules that causes the cooking and basing process of to take place. Already I mentioned that water is a major component of food. A cucumber is 94% water, and avocado is 73% water, and a chicken breast is 69% water. The properties of water must be considered in when thinking about food and cooking. Water expands when freezing, which impacts the texture of any types of foods that can frozen and thawed without damage. And water has a high heat of vaporization and fusion, which makes water-rich foods take longer and higher. There are different, you might have sugars. In daily life, you use sugar. Then why complex sugar are very bad for you? Sugar, the chemical formula is sugar and everything with this carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. These three are involved in this sugar. If it is a fructose or glucose, in all this it is carbon and hydrogen and oxygen. Sugar or refined sugar has gained a reputation as being of bad for you. Refined sugar is simply purified sucrose, fructose, or glucose that comes from sugar cane, sugar beets, or other plants as corn. There is nothing intrinsically bad about the sugar molecule when it is present in food or used in cooking. In fact, consuming 1 gram of sucrose or fructose that is added to food in cooking. Food in cooking will have this same effect as eating of 1 gram of the same sugar from fruit or other plant source. As an example, one banana contains about the same amount of simple sugar as prepared food that contains 4 tablespoons of granulated sugar per serving. The excess consumption of sugar, like any food, results in poor health consequences. If you take anything excess, that will definitely affect your health. Spikes in glucose or in blood sugar occur after you consume a supersized candy bar that contains 40 grams of carbohydrates, that is in the form of a simple sugar. These sugars are easily absorbed into your body and causing a spike in blood glucose levels from 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. Having a chronic and high blood sugar leads to a number of negative health consequences, including glaucoma. You will have different diseases if you excess sugar. You get glaucoma, nerve damage in the extreme. And why do you get a crash after eating a large quantity of sugar? Once the glucose level rises, the body releases a hormone called insulin. Some people have become diabetic. Some you might have heard that they are injecting insulin into their body. When the glucose level rises, then the body releases hormone called insulin from the pancreas. Insulin allows the glucose to move from the circulatory system into the muscle tissue. The amount of insulin released is directly proportional to the levels of glucose in the blood. Thus, abnormally high amount of sugar due to mega candy bar consumption cause abnormally large amounts of insulin to be secreted by the pancreas, resulting in a high amount of glucose to be transported into the muscle tissue. This phenomenon results in a serious reduction of blood sugar to a level that much lower than a premeal level. Because of the brain gets most of its energy from blood glucose, low level of blood glucose causes you a tired, weak, and confused, even dizzy figure. So you will be very careful about excess use of sugar. Interestingly, eating the same mass of complex carbohydrates avoid the spike and crash in blood sugar levels, because the starch or the glycogen polymers have to be broken down by the digestive enzyme in the gut before the individual glucose molecules can be transported from the intestine into the bloodstream. This takes time and allows the gradual release of glucose into the circulatory system. The result is slow, gradual increase and decline in blood sugar levels due to the modest and controlled release of insulin. The rate at which food spikes the blood glucose level is called the glycemic index. Food that contain high amounts of simple sugar have a high glycemic index. The complex carbohydrates, including starch and fibers, have much lower glycemic index. Now we'll just move to what is thickeners. The ability to thicken a soup. Most of the people are very much aware of the soup, sauce and all. Then the ability to thicken a soup, gravy or sauce or a beverage is a critical tool for any cook. The trick to create a successful thickened sauce, soup, gravy is through incorporation of a complex carbohydrate and that binds water, yielding a more viscous liquid. The feeling that comes with a tasting and eating a thick gravy or salad dressing called mouthfeel. In order to understand how thickening works, you need to learn some physics about the liquids. Water is considered a Newtonian fluid because there is a proportional relation between viscosity and the force applied to the fluid. The more viscous the Newtonian fluid, the more force required to get it to flow. Gravies and other thickened foods are non-Newtonian fluids. These fluids require a large force to start movement. But once in motion, non-Newtonian fluids move with a greater ease. Most of you have experience with ketchup. What a great example of fluid that does not easily start to move, but once flowing, flows much faster than you often desire. What does a non-Newtonian fluid do with mouth feel? The stickiness and viscosity of non-fluid are amazingly dictated by the human mouth and give food containing these fluids as a distinctive, pleasurable character. Think of a soup that seems watery versus one that has been thickened with a starch or gum. The thickened soup tastes better than even when the flavor of soup is identical. One cooking technique used to thicken a recipe is called reduction. Heating a mixture provides enough energy to the water molecules to allow them to rotate, vibrate, and escape the intermolecular force that hold the water molecule to place. As the water boils off, the remaining molecules complex, carbohydrates or proteins are forced to interact with each other, increasing the viscosity of the fluid. Unfortunately, this preparation that requires high heat or long cooking times often alters the flavor and nature of the fluid unintended way. The starches found in flour can form a paste and gelatinize for use in gravies and stews. Thick flour pastes are difficult to form as the starch solidifies in a lower water environment. Cooks will use fats to coat and interact with the starch. Such a mixture called rocks is the base of pasta or gravies that some thick stews. How do you decide what thickening agent to use? A protein, a starch, or a gum? It depends upon the flavor and final presentation of the desired food. Is the food to be served hot or cold? Proteins coagulate upon cooling, while gums and starches are more effective thickness when cooled. Starch thickens quickly, clump when reheated. If you want to clear a thickened soup, some gums can be used in a small amount to avoid clumping and cloudiness. But both starch and xanthan gums work well for viscous preparations. pH can also impact the behavior of thickening of agents. Acidic foods cause some gums to be less effective. Thus, cornstarch and arrowroot starch is a better choice. Clear jelly is a chemically modified cornstarch that is specially made for baking and freezing acidic foods. It's a good choice for acid-containing foods, pies that need thickening. Now we'll move to emulsions. Proteins, lipids, and complex carbohydrates can each be used to prepare a critical techniques for food and cooking called an emulsion. Emulsions are evenly mixed dispersions of two compounds that repel each other. Example of food emulsions include, you are very much aware with this emulsion, sauces, dressings, or mayonnaises. In chemical terms, the two phases are immiscible. In an emulsion, the two phases are immiscible in terms of chemically what we are saying. A common culinary emulsion is a mixture of oil and water. If there is a more water than oil, the emulsion is called oil in water emulsion. And if there is more oil than water, then the emulsion is water in oil emulsion. Mayonnaise is an oil water emulsion. White butter is a water in oil emulsion. Either way, basic concept of cooking with an emulsion is to create a smell enough droplets or fragrance of the oil or water to be evenly dispersed through a mixture. Small droplets are created by physical force called shearing. Is most commonly performed using blenders, whisking, or food processors. Industrial kitchens use fine gauges of strainers and force the fluids to create an emulsion. Consider shaking a mixture of oil and water. Shake or mix hard enough and tiny spears of oil will seemingly mix within the water. But the two phases quickly separate from each other. That is the challenge for making an emulsion, keeping the solutions mixed. Most of the people are very much familiar with mayonnaise. Emulsifiers are food additive compounds that help create emulsion from separating back into two distinct layers. For oil in water emulsion, an emulsifier must have both water-loving and water-fearing region. Emulsifiers surrounded oil droplets with a hydrophobic portion of the molecule and align the hydrophobic region of the molecule to face the water. A second additive called a stabilizer is also often used to making emulsions. Stabilizers help keep the small droplets prepared in the emulsion from returning to a larger mass and finally fully separating into two layers. Some molecules can act both emulsifier and stabilizer. Common ingredients used for emulsifiers and stabilizer are egg yolks. The key compound in egg yolks used as an emulsifier is in a phospholipid lecithin. So emulsifiers plays a very important role in our cooking. Now, another thing of cooking is the science of taste and smell. Taste is very much important factor as part of in terms of cooking. How you taste and smell impact the flavor of our food and drink. Understanding the molecular nature or of how we perceive our food as well as the nature of the molecules that signal to our senses can help one appreciate food and drink and give a chef, cook or baker a leg up on creating appealing dishes. That what is the physiology of taste, smell and flavor? You walk through the door and it hits you. You immediately recognize that smell of your favorable holiday foods. Almost as quickly your body responds, your mouth begins creating saliva and your stomach rumbles. The smell of food not only allows you to recognize it is time to eat, but it lets your body begin to prepare to digest your food. While smell is a very strong memory stimulus for all human, it is a special relationship with the taste and our concept of flavor. Scientifically, smell and taste, smell is olfaction and taste is gustation, are part of the human body's sensory system. Specifically, they function through chemoreception, which is the ability of a body to respond to chemicals in the immediate environment. In gestation, your body is responding to chemicals referred to as tastens, chemicals that can stimulate taste receptors. Similarly, in olfaction, receptors in your nasal cavity are responding to chemicals called odorants that stimulate smell receptors. Typically, when we comment on how great a specific food or beverage tastes, What we are really commenting on are the flavors of that item. Flavor is the blend and taste and smell sensations you perceive while eating and drinking. The term flavorant can be used as a compound that use both senses to impart a flavor. Another common usage of tasted is a compound that mimics a flavor or gives a food or drink its flavor. We will use the term tasted throughout this. We are always using this term tasted. How the compounds bind to their receptors and signal to the brain. We also discuss how many sensations we describe in taste are actually provided by the olfactory systems. And truly enjoy the flavor of our favorite foods, and both systems must participate in forming sensations. Sensory receptors are specialized tissues that initiate electrical signals and that carry information in your central nervous system and allows you to respond to your environment. We have variety of senses, each tuned to different environmental energies. These sensory modalities include touch, temperature, pain, body position, taste, smell, sight, sound. Each of the sensory system responds to a specific sensory input called an adequate stimulus and sends electrical impulse to process of sensory transduction. When you put your hot pack or ice pack on your skin, your touch receptors inform you that something is on your skin, but the temperature sensors tell you whether it is hot or cold. Each sensory receptor type responds to one physiological adequate stimulus. To understand how this works for taste or smell, we'll see the taste and how taste receptors function, and then do the same organs and the olfactory system. John Anthem Brilliant Savarin is an 18th century gastronomist. He said, smell and taste are, in fact, but a single sense, whose laboratory is the both and whose chimney is, whose laboratory is the both and whose chimney is the nose. Gestation, how we perceive taste, is a combination of both smell and taste. To understand gestation, one must recognize the relation between taste buds and olfactory system, and how we perceive taste and smell in brain, and to understand the difference between taste and flavor. Taste is the sensation originating from the oral cavity, while flavor is the combination of odor and taste. In addition to these molecules that signal to our gestation and olfaction senses, flavor influenced by inputs called somatosensory sensations. It is a complex contribution of sensations including temperature, pain, and density of food. Thus, how we perceive food and drink is much more complicated than what food hits our tongue. To understand the process of flavor, we should follow the path from food flavor molecule to the brain. So, brain is the ultimate part of this on how we'll taste a material. Flavor formally initiate when a small molecule escaping from our food and drink binds to a protein receptor on the surface of the two specialized cells, a taste receptor cell or an olfactory nerve fibers, the signal perceiving flavor to our brain. A careful tracing of the route of taste and smell to and from and olfactory nerve cells can involve three pathways. First, an initial sniffing of food bring odorants and tastings directly to the olfactory nerve, where small volatile components of food and drink will bind to the receptor nerves to the olfactory nerve fibers in the nasal cavity. Second is the process of chewing food. So the odorants and tastings are similar receptors in the olfactory and taste bud receptors. Depending upon the type of receptors activated, biochemical changes led to a membrane depolarization, release of neurotransmitter to the sensory nerves and central nervous system. These signals then carried to the brain when flavor and smell are perceived. So there are different types taste. There's a sweet taste. So sweet is commonly described as having the pleasant taste characteristics of sugar or honey. You have most of the people like the sweet taste. This sweet taste is not initiated by a single classification of chemical. The chemicals that simulate sweet taste include sugars, glycols, aldehydes, esters, some amino acids, and some small proteins. Most of the chemicals that simulate sweet taste are organic molecules. Now another is bitter taste. Bitter relates to having a sharp and pungent taste. Similar to sweet taste, bitter is not caused by a single class of chemicals. Two particular classes of substance typically induce bitter taste. The first class of substance is called alkaloids, which are a group of naturally occurring chemical compounds containing basic nitrogen atoms. Alkaloids such as quinine, caffeine, strychnine, and nicotine are commonly used in medicinal drugs. The second class is made of a long chain organic substance containing nitrogen. Relatively simple chemical modification can change a chemical substance from a sweet to bitter. So a simple chemical modification once we can a sweet item, we can make it a bitter one. Then the sour taste. Sour is recognized as having an acid taste like lemon or vinegar. A sour taste sensation is due to the presence of weak organic acids. So weak organic acids are present, then we will get a sour taste. That partially dissociate into its conjugate base and proton. The actual signaling taste in this molecule is caused by both the hydrogen ion concentration and the type of organic acid. The intensity of sour taste is proportional to the hydrogen ion concentration. Thus, the more acidic the food or drink, the stronger the sour sensation will be. Salty taste is the basic taste of seawater or more commonly table salt. Salty taste is simulated by ionized salts such as sodium, potassium, or sodium ion, potassium ion, lithium ion. The quality of the salty taste varies with the cation present, but sodium cations give the strongest response. The anionic partners to these cations also contribute to the salty taste, but to a lesser extent. This another umami is the meteors or savory taste of a glutamate proteins easily recognized in monosodium glutamate. Umami is a Japanese word meaning delicious. Most people describe it as a pleasant taste that is qualitatively distinct from the other four taste sensations. Umami is the predominant taste of amino acid glutamate. Now, why do we taste? Taste allows us to evaluate the nutritious content of the food while preventing us from eating toxic substances. Salty taste allows us to identify food and liquids that contain essential salts necessary for the maintenance of electrolyte balance. Sweet taste allows us to identify food that is high in energy-rich nutrients. Umami allows us to recognition of amino acids and proteins necessary as building blocks of proteins in our bodies. On the other hand, bitter and sour taste give us a warning against the intake of potentially noxious or poisonous substance. Because by tasting this, we can identify that whether it is, we cannot taste a poisonous substance and whether it is a poison, we cannot take a risk. So our tongue will taste, and that will ultimately that signal will go to the brain, and we will get a measure that this is a sweet taste, this is a souring taste, and human can identify this different type of taste. So we are telling about the different molecular structures. Now, how we will inverting a sugar for jam? The inversion of sucrose is an essential part of the process of making jams and preserves during the jam making process. A fruit and a large amount of added sugar are boiled together for a period of time. During boiling, the fruit softens its actin is dissolved in the mixture and much of the fruit's water is evaporated away. The mild acidity of the fruit promotes the hydrolysis of up to half of the added sucrose to glucose and fructose, a process called inversion. This chemistry has various beneficial effects in jam making. So most of the things what we are discussing, it is about the different types, what are the different, how to taste different types of food, then how to make thickeners, what is emulsifiers, then how we can inverting sugar for jam. Now let us see some physics of it. You know that most of the people are very much with this pressure cooker because that is commonly using in our kitchen. Then what is the physics behind this? The cooker works by raising the temperature of boiling water and thereby speeding up the time it takes to boil, raise or steam. You use a pressure cooker, you put the food in the pot with some liquid, usually minimum of 2 cups, and sufficient steam pressure. Once the lid is locked in place and cooker is set on high heat, steam develops in the pot and it can't escape. And this trapped steam increases the atmospheric pressure inside the cooker by 15 pounds per square inch or 15 pounds above normal sea level pressure. At that pressure, the boiling point of water is increased from 100 degrees to 120 degrees Celsius. The higher temperature is what cooks food faster. Once the cooker is reached a full pressure, usually indicated by a gauge pop-up rod on the lid, and release the valve opens, letting out steam in a regulated flow to maintain a constant temperature inside the pot. So when you are using a cooker, pressure cooker in your kitchen, you just remember the physics, what is the science behind the pressure cooker. Because if you take each and everything in your kitchen, you can see that there is some science behind that one. Now let us see what is microwave oven. That is very micro principle behind that microwave oven is very simple about the atom. Ready to I explain that about the molecule, what is the changes happening in molecular level. When you add energy to an atom or molecule, it vibrates. More energy equals more vibrations, and this generates heat. While heat energy can make molecules vibrate, there is another way to achieve the same result, taking advantage of electrical charges. Water molecules, what are called dipoles, like a magnet, they each have a positive charge at one end and a negative at other end. This means that they can be jostled around with a magnetic field. In a microwave oven, this is achieved by generating and passing a short radio waves known as microwaves within this unit. And the device that converts electrical energy into microwaves is called the magnetron, that sends microwaves into the oven cavity where they bounce off and reflect in the surfaces. Now, already I have talked about bread, and then we are using rising agents in cooking and baking, but not the chemistry. What is the chemistry involved in baking? Most of the people are heard about this baking soda. It is sodium bicarbonate. There are 2 rising agents used in most recipes: yeast and baking powder. Yeast is Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's a microorganism that contains the enzyme zymase that converts the sugar into bread and carbon dioxide and ethanol. So a lot of chemical process is taking place when you are adding yeast to a particular food item. This baking powder is nothing but it is sodium bicarbonate. Gluten in the bread is a fibrous compound that structures the bread riser and traps the carbon dioxide in an elastic framework. Yeast grows in a warm environment so that bread is kept warm until it rises. When it is placed in a hot oven, the yeast increases production of the carbon dioxide initially, then dies as the temperature rises. The carbon dioxide trapped in the bread expands and the bread rises even more. The flavor comes partly from the ethanol produced by the yeast. Now, most of these oranges, pineapple, strawberry, all are which vitamins are very much essential for our growth. These all vitamin beta carotene, those are vitamin C, and rich vegetables. Previously, I told about the glutamic, the umami taste glutamic acid, the neurotransmitter that excites our neurons just in our tongues. This is a most of the people are heard about this. This Ajinomoto, this monosodium glutamate. Select, so that is a that will produce our this taste buds in our stimulate our taste buds in our tongues. If you excess use of Ajinomoto, that will harm to our body. So if you take food from outside and all, sometimes you feel that the food is very much tasted, then you will have a tendency to take that food again and again. So in some places you use excessive use of this Ajinomoto. The free glutamic acid can cause problem to our brain. Our brain have many receptors for glutamic acid, and some areas such as hypothalamus do not have an impermeable blood-brain barrier. So free glutamic acid from food source can get into the brain, and this can injure and sometimes kill the neurons. Sometimes when you take coffee, you make morning fresh and energetic. What is the reason? When you take a cup of coffee, then you say that, oh, I get energy. Caffeine is a central nervous system that stimulates. It's one of the most popular drugs in the world, consumed by 90% of the people in the world in different form. Caffeine is a stimulant of the central nervous system that cardiac muscles increase, heart rate and respiratory system, relaxes air passages, permitting improved inhalation and allows some muscles to contract more easily. It acts as a diuretic, increase the rate of bodily urine excretion and delay the fatigue, having the effect of warding off drowsiness and restoring alertness. Caffeine absorption occurs in the body very quickly. It enters the bloodstream through the stomach and small intestine, and its effects are felt as soon as 15 minutes after consumption. It's completely absorbed within 45 minutes intake. Caffeine does not accumulate in bloodstream or not is stored in the body, but it does persist, but only about half is eliminated in the urine within 6 hours. Caffeine sensitivity refers to the amount of caffeine that will produce negative side effects in the particular person. Regular caffeine consumption reduces sensitivity to caffeine and a higher intake needed for the same effect. So caffeine is considered to be an addictive drug. So this is another way most of the people are, when you cut an onion in your kitchen, you started crying. But what is the science behind this? What is onion cell? And inside an onion cell, there are some chemical compounds that contain sulfur. When we cut an onion cell, cells are broken, and those chemical compounds then undergo a reaction that transforms them to more volatile sulfur product, which is released into the air. These sulfur compounds react with the moisture in our eyes and forming a sulfonic acid, which produces a burning sensation. The nerve endings in our eyes are very sensitive, and so they pick up on this irritation. The brain reacts by telling your tear ducts to produce more water to dilute irritation. Can you prevent how the remedies are the sulfonic acid reaction details. There are some tricks to make onion lysine less problematic. You can freeze the onion for 10 minutes before cutting it. The cold temperature of the onion will slow down the chemical reaction which forms the volatile sulfur compounds. The sulfur containing compounds also leave a characteristic odor on your fingers. You may be able to remove or reduce some of the smell by wiping your fingers on a stainless steel odor. If the sulfur compounds bind to the steel, then the odor is removed from your fingers. Chop the onion under cold water. The volatile sulfur compounds will be released, but when they react with the water and instead of reaching your eyes. Then some people keep garlics to keep away the parasites. But the sulfurous compounds is called allicin. That allicin is synthesized from allicin when garlic is crushed or bruised. Allicin is a oily yellow liquid which gives garlic its characteristic odor due to the sulfonyl group. This is a functional group that is present in this garlic. And this is a strongly oxidizing compound. It protects garlic from the attack by bacteria and insects by disabling the enzyme that are found in the substrate necessary for infections to occur. It is a natural insecticide. It does so by attracting the acid group found on their active sites. And spices contain essential oils with antimicrobial properties. Many of the oils were derived from the organic compound phenol. This oil is used to an antiseptic and disinfectant also. In European countries, the turmeric became known as Indian saffron since it was widely used as an alternative to far more expensive saffron spice. It can exist at least two tautomeric forms, keto form and enol form. The keto form is preferred the solid phase and the enol form is an solution. And turmeric is a good indicator also. You can use it. You can show that in a lab, you can a homemade indicator. In acidic solution, it turns yellow color, but in alkali basic solution, it turns bright red. So it's an antiseptic turmeric. And this turmeric powder is, most of people are using turmeric powder and an antiseptic because that is very good for health. So many diseases we can say preventive medicine for some diseases. So some people know this COVID period, and also people have this tendency to gargle with this turmeric powder. In such situations, so we can identify that some important items what we are using in our kitchen, that is also helpful for, not helpful for our body, there is also some medicines that can be used as a medicine. So you see that what is happening to onion, then the garlic, turmeric powder. So with these things, just I covered the various various topics related to your science behind your kitchen, then what is happening in our daily life, and some physics behind the happening in your kitchen. So these are the things I would like to share with you. Hope that you have enjoyed this program. And Regional Science and Planetarium, since you know that it's a lockdown period, we are not allowing visitors to enter our center, but still doing online activities. Hope that we can open this soon. We can open our center to visitors and can come and enjoy our facilities, and you can explore and enter into the new world of science. Okay, thank you.